She's 60 pounds of pure muscle. She lives in a log jam, eats big bluegill for lunch, and we got just what it takes to put her in the boat. The Hog Log is 100% made in the USA and is backed by a lifetime warranty. We fish for the fish that eat the fish you fish for, and you should too. Quit jacking around and get you some Hog Logs today.
All right, we are back with episode 2 of the MudbuM USA Lifestyle Podcast. I'm super excited about making it to podcast number 2. I think a lot of people start the podcasting and get discouraged with technical difficulties and the views that they get. But this is just going to be it's going to be a process, right? And figuring stuff out. I'm your co-host, Blake Show, with Mitch Fink. And, Mitch, we're at that time in the year that I personally hate because the snow is starting to melt. Everything is muddy. I mean, we had downpours this weekend, tornadoes down in central Iowa. So our thoughts and prayers are with everybody as they, put together pieces of their life that got destroyed through tornadoes. The river's starting to open up, but everything's muddy. And so you're excited about spring. And now, today, school's 2 hours late again because we got snow.
Absolutely.
So, as we get into this time of the season, I think it's like a lull, right? That people don't have much to get excited about, and we got to find things to keep us busy, which, is probably going to be the topics of our next few podcasts, because helping people get outdoors in this time when there's not really hunting seasons, fishing hasn't taken off and things like that. You're transitioning between ice fishing and being able to get out in the boat and things like that. So, this week I want to talk about shed hunting. It's kind of getting to that point of the year that you can get out shed hunting. You're not going to mess up anybody's late season muzzleloader hunting or anything like that. In the coming episodes, we can talk about morel mushroom hunting, which I know we both love to do, as well as getting into turkey hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, we're kind of in a strange time because I was out on the ice fishing like literally a week and a half ago, and now the river has gone up a foot. Okay, some of the banks right now, there's 15 feet from the shore to the ice, and it's like, what do? Kids are going stir crazy. The weather is heating up, so you kind of got to figure out what the heck you want to do.
Yeah, you want to get outside. Nobody wants to still be stuck inside. But you're just limited in what you can do out there.
Absolutely.
So I Saturday, like I said, it rained storms in Iowa, and so Saturday was pretty much shot. But yesterday I got out with the kids and we went shed hunting for a little bit. It was muddy.
It is very.
So we ended up stripping down the snow pants and the boots, throwing them right in the washer and dryer to get them cleaned up for school. But you know what? We still got out. We found a few sheds, and it was good to get out. Have you been out shed hunting at all?
I went out a couple times. We found some smaller sheds. Like you said, though, it's rained a little bit. We're kind of waiting for it to dry up a little bit. But, as long as you get out on foot, you can go out there, walk around with the kids, still find shed racks. We love to take the Ranger because I've got a small army of children. And they range from 1-year-old all the way up to 7. So it's tough to walk 6 or 7 miles when you've got the 1.5-year-old you're carrying basically, and then the 3-year-old's good for about 800 yards, and then he's going to start complaining. But so you definitely can get out there right now and look for them. They're out there right now, and it's good to try and get out there too before they get all chewed up. But then again, it's pretty wet, like you said.
Yeah, chewed up, as well as come morel and turkey hunting season, the greens are going to start covering stuff up again. It's going to be a little bit tougher to see. I like getting out, when there's still snow, like January time frame, is like late January. I like getting out. The problem that we face, and I've noticed, is Iowa specifically has extended deer hunting season so late anymore.
Absolutely.
I mean, you've got late muzzleloader. In some zones, you've got, late doe seasons. You've got CWD management zones and things like that. So you're hunting damn near till February.
You are, absolutely. Them CWD zones go late.
Yeah.
Super late. So like you said, you can't really get out there in the middle of the hunting season looking for sheds.
Yeah.
But
and what I've noticed doing those late doe seasons, even muzzleloader and the CWD, so specifically you're looking for big mature does. That's what they want for CWD, right?
For sure.
So now you do a drive, or you're sitting there and you shoot a big doe, you get up to it, and it's a shed buck.
Giant shed
You're
buck.
wasting your shed bucks. And I understand where the DNR and conservation is going and why they want those, but I feel like we're taking a lot of mature deer
Absolutely.
out of the mix by having those seasons. Because and I think that's why they put it on the tags. It's an antlerless.
It's an antler
It's
season.
not they don't specify sex.
Yep.
And I know late muzzleloader, we shot 2 that thought were big does, got up to them, and it was shed bucks.
Yeah. That season, I love venison, man. I love it. I do all sorts of different recipes with venison, so I don't want to discourage people from going out and hunting, but that season is tough because you hear them stories all the time about, we did a deer drive for the CWD season and 6 of the does that we shot were bucks, or 3 of them were bucks, you know, and so it's kind of like, gosh, you know what I mean? Like you hate hearing that because
You do it, and we talked about it before. I get excited for deer hunting because I get to fill the freezer and things like that. I rarely get super excited unless I got a buck on camera that is absolutely a stud, right? Those 100 and 130 inch deer to even 150 are great deer, but it doesn't get me super excited. But I know when I shoot a shed buck in those late seasons, I get disappointed because you never know what that deer's potential is going to be.
Yeah, it could have been that big jumbo that you had watched all year. I mean, it's happened to us before. Like, I'm an avid whitetail guy. I love to bow hunt. I love to early muzzleloader hunt, late muzzleloader hunt because we're landowners. And there's nothing worse than walking up and seeing pop can sized pedicles on what you thought was a doe.
Yeah, for sure. It's super frustrating, but again, I think it's just come to be what we got to deal with until they get the CWD under control.
Sure.
And who knows? I mean, maybe even the doe seasons will go away again. Those are probably the last 5 years, 10 years maybe, that we've had a late doe season where we're shooting does only. But we've had antlers pop off in early shotgun season too.
I've seen antlers fall off in first season. Like, actually every year it happens to us. It really does. Like, you shoot a deer, you shoot a nice buck and go to grab the antler to drag it down the hill, and boom, the antler pops off.
Yeah.
And it's just strange, like, when, like, there's still deer holding right now. I run a lot of cell cams, so I do a lot of Spartan cell cameras, got them all over, just because I like watching wildlife in general. You never know what you get on those cameras, but there's still deer holding right now. So that kind of brings up like a topic, like, when do you go shed hunting? You know what I mean? You got some that are shedding in the first season, shotgun season, which is like early December for us folks in Iowa. But then you've got deer that I've seen deer holding as late as April.
And I think there's some that don't drop at all.
Yeah,
out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen deer in like way past April still holding rags. One thing that I kind of learned, my brother is big into shed hunting. I got a cousin that's big into shed hunting. I think he's at 35 already for the year. I mean, these guys, they do the miles for piles though, man. Like, these guys are walking the hills. But one thing I think is that has really surprised me over the years of shed hunting is the fact that I go into areas where I know there's a high population of deer. So obviously lots of deer, you're going to think that there's a lot of shed racks, okay? And I'll walk that field edge, or I'll walk between the bedding area and the food source, and you might find one little shed, and you're like, what the hell? Like, during the early muzzleloader season, we saw 12 bucks in the same corner. Well, you can walk those fields, find one shed, go walk it the next week, find 2 sheds, go walk that same spot again, find another 3 sheds. You just don't know when those guys are dropping their racks.
Yeah, and shed hunting is such one of those things that you're like you say, you put yourself around where you think the deer are and give yourself a best probability of finding antlers, right? You're not going to go walk down a city park sidewalk. Shed hunting, you're going to put yourself in the woods and in between food sources and bedding areas and south-facing hillsides and
for sure.
But I never find antlers there. Every time, it's when I'm walking up on sheds, it's always like, oh shit, there's one. I never would have expected it there, but I guess I'll take it, right?
Yep, absolutely.
It's so weird. Have you seen, or have you ever done? I don't even know if it's legal in Iowa. like shed traps?
The shed traps, I've thought of those, and everyone, I think, loves the idea of having to be able to walk to one central location and find all your sheds.
Right.
I wish it was all that easy. I wish the deer had a place that they all ate breakfast in the morning, because we could just go over there and all the sheds would be there. Okay, but that's not the case. These deer are everywhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think shed traps do work. There's a lot of discussion about that. A lot of people feel like, I've heard, and I've never really done shed traps. I've thought of them, but I've talked to guys who know people who have done them, and they say a lot of times a deer can, if they're not ready to shed, they can get stuck in there and completely damage the pedicle, I think they call it, of the animal. So like, there's a lot of guys that say absolutely not, because they're finding sheds that have part of the skull on them.
Sure.
They're not ready to shed.
Yeah.
So that can potentially damage that deer. So like when it grows next year. So, I mean, I love the idea behind it. I think, sweet, man, like throw, 200 pounds of corn down and wait for the bucks to come in there and just bump their rack and it falls off.
Right.
But a lot of times they're just not ready to fall off. You know what I mean? So I don't know about that, man. Like, I'm sure that we've probably got viewers that are like, that's how I find all my sheds. Sweet. If it's working and not damaging deer, heck, go ahead. But, you know, it's just something we've never really,
Yeah, I haven't either. And it goes into talking about how late our season's going, right? In Iowa, you can't bait deer while their season's going on.
Absolutely.
And if you want to get them before they're dropping their antlers, well, like we talked about, a lot of these deer are dropping antlers in season anymore. And so now you face that. You can't really bait or even put minerals out, which I want to get into at some point and talk. When it comes down to salt and mineral licks, those deer need that in the hard months when it's January, February, and now we're handcuffed as landowners and trying to manage deer herds that we can't get them those extra minerals and stuff that we need. This year we had a pretty decent, it wasn't a harsh winter, so I don't think it was as needed, but you get those spring ice storms and things like that, those deer really need the salt and mineral licks that we try and put out for them. So I think that's another whole discussion about when we can and when we can't put out bait or attractants.
Yeah, that's I believe in those minerals. I believe in those supplements, especially because if you look at like a whitetail's cycle, they go into pre-rut and then they're starting to develop their territories, right? Then we move into full rut, and these animals are going absolutely crazy, during the breeding season, right? So they're not eating like they should. They're running themselves down. They're fighting, and then you move straight into when Iowa can potentially have a really harsh winter, right? So it's like that animal needs to, as soon as they come off the rut, you'll see them. If you've got any type of food source, they are gorging on food. Well, a lot of times if that winter comes in hard right after the rut, the food sources are gone. Everything is covered up. I mean, there's just nothing there for them. Well, that's where those minerals and like those protein pellets, a lot of guys are going to these, protein pellet based, mineral site type deals, and I think it is super important. But like you said, you really got to kind of be careful because you can't hunt over those sites. I think you can have them out there, but you can't be hunting over top of them, So yeah, I'm a firm believer in that stuff. And I know a lot of guys that put these mineral sites out and these protein sites out, and they have food plots too to support these animals, and those are the guys that are always finding the giant big sheds because they've got the deer coming in there, they've got the food sources, and they're year in and year out growing bigger deer because they're feeding them, so
yeah, you put, like you say, you go skin a buck in December after the rut, and then you skin a doe to process it. The amount of fat on a doe compared to the amount of fat on it's non-existent almost.
Yeah, it's crazy.
When you skin a buck. It
really is crazy. I've actually had pictures. If you want to do something really fun for our viewers out there, go ahead and put trail cameras out during your summer months when those bucks are growing, okay? And you can always tell, like, when a buck starts to grow a neat characteristic, like let's say he's got a double brow tine. Well, that's pretty easy to identify. So he's grown his rack, you see that double brow tine, and you'll see how small his neck is during the summer, and it looks like a super young deer.
They almost look sick.
Yeah, they're like, really skinny.
They almost looks, you can see the ribs and everything. Like they almost look sick in the summer.
It's pretty wild, like watching them deer grow, and then you obviously can identify that characteristic of like the double brow. Well, then they start going into that pre-rut where they're scraping their velvet off of their antlers, and then they're in full rut where they're raking their antlers through the trees and they're really building their neck muscles. If you compare those summer pictures to some of those like middle November pictures, it's crazy. It doesn't even look like the same deer, but it's pretty fun to do that. You know, watch that deer grow, see how big it gets, and then you'll actually see that deer start to kind of get smaller as the rut goes away because they're not testosterone fueled and so forth. But pretty neat how to figure that out.
Yeah, for sure. And shed hunting, for me, it gives me something to do in the spring, but it also allows me to inventory deer as well.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
for the most part, you can tell what deer's made it through the hunting season.
For sure.
And then, like you say, when you find them, you can verify throughout the summer what their rack's going to look like the next year and things like that. When yesterday, we found a pretty decent one that we had camera pictures of all season, so he made it through. So yeah, big split brow like you were talking about, real tall, not real wide, not super heavy, but probably a 3-4 year old deer for sure, and he's gonna be a stud next year.
Good up and comer.
See if he can get some mass on him.
Yeah, in the kids, like we as a team here want to focus on like the kids, like what we can do to make them have a lot of fun, because we have families, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers have families, and watching those deer during the summer and checking the cameras, the kids love checking cameras and watching these big bucks grow, and then finding the sheds off that buck is pretty exciting for our kids. And my kids go nuts when we go and check trail cameras. It's like Christmas Day. They'll sit in front of the computer and they're checking all these deer. And it's funny because my oldest son is getting to the point now where he can remember deer.
Yeah,
he'll be like, that deer, we had that deer on camera last year. Or he'll go grab a shed rack and be like, this is the shed off of this one. He's back this year. That stuff is fun.
And that's so exciting.
And that's kind of the point of these podcasts is like, what can we do to entertain ourselves in the off season? Because obviously Blake and I are like chomping at the bit to get our bank poles out, man, and the hog logs out there. So, but this is like something that can pass time, gets your kids excited, they have a good time, and it passes time.
Getting the kids involved is one of my biggest things right now. My wife is reading a book about, how the generations have been demasculated through the last couple decades, right?
Yeah.
And it was, again, it's a whole nother conversation.
For sure.
But knowing that my kids want to go out and be outside, be in the outdoors, just gives me a sense of satisfaction as well, that I know that they're going to carry on those traditions as well. And with everything going on in the world, I'm concerned about what's going on, but I'm never concerned for my family because I know we can provide for each other off the land and things like that.
Absolutely.
And to raise my kids like that is a super big deal.
Yeah.
That I'm excited about to watch them continue to want to grow. I mean, they started shooting bows this year, so we got that. They want to be able to carry their empty BB guns through the woods, looking for racks and shed antlers and things like that. So I'm super excited to watch them and see their excitement grow throughout the outdoors.
Yeah, we love that, like getting our kids involved in this. And you brought up a pretty good topic, with everything going on in the world, like, raising your children to be able to really survive in the wild if they had to. Not saying that they will have to, but it's good to know that they have that in their back pocket to do it. Mm-hmm. You're talking about BB guns. We just got my oldest son the Red Ryder.
Oh, yeah.
The old original Red Ryder. And the funny thing about that gun is he's very smart with gun safety. He understands where your muzzle direction always goes. He understands what the safety is. I mean, he's shot deer, he's shot turkeys, but the little Red Ryder is something that he can go out and just plink around all the time. You pour the BBs in the barrel, what can it fit? 10,000 shots in it. You don't even got to you don't got to have to refill that thing. I mean, there's 10,000 BBs in there. And he pumps that damn gun until his arm is pretty much limp.
Yeah.
But that's such a really fun thing for him to get to be able to do. And that's why we focus more like these podcasts on like what can we do to get our kids involved. And it's from shooting, like archery. We've got an indoor archery range here at our place. It's only a 20-yard range, but in the winter, they're shooting bows in here, getting ready because he wants to shoot a turkey with a bow because turkey season's coming up, And,
Yep. No, I'm bringing up the BB guns as kids. So my brother and I had BB guns, of course, as kids, and we go shooting at rabbits and birds and things like that, like every other kid. And we shot them things so much. The barrels, from grabbing the barrel and cocking, the barrels took a curve to
I wish shoot around trees.
Of all the shit my mom kept from when we were kids, I wish she would have kept those BB guns to put on the wall.
Oh man, between BB guns and firecrackers, my childhood was exciting. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
But there's a good story about that. We all had BB guns too, and they were the original Red Riders. And we shot BB guns at birds and rabbits and squirrels. But where we got in trouble at is when we decided to shoot at the neighbors. The neighbor girls that we used to play with. That was where we got our BB guns taken away.
It doesn't take too long.
We are not promoting shooting people with BB guns, but we were little wild childs back then.
But we grew and we learned from it, right?
Oh yeah, you got scolded when you did that, and you never did it again. And it was pretty wild growing up.
I remember we got ours taken away one time, so we got sick of shooting at paper. So we had some clay pigeons that we had got that we were setting up. And,
sure.
I didn't want to shoot at it just sitting still anymore. So I told my brother. It was early spring, right? So when we were out there, he had snow pants on and big coat. And so I made him take a stick up there, put the clay pigeon on a stick, turned his back to it, and started moving it like
gun safety, folks.
And mom saw that, and she shut that shit down fast. But it's just one of those things we learn. Kids are kids, and you don't put them in the hands of dangerous situations.
Sure.
But you have to set them up to learn and make experiences and things like that. And that's what I've looked forward to continuing to do with my kids.
Yeah, and that's why we love this podcast, is we're going to just suggest things that you can get your kids in. And what is so cool about this podcast is we're going to suggest things that you can do with your kids that don't cost you hardly anything to do.
No.
From the hog logs to buying a BB gun. The BB gun was $36, and it teaches them to shoot. It's easy, it's light, it's safe. And these things, like that's the idea behind this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. So when you were out shed hunting too, like what's their average that you find a year?
So like last year, I think I didn't get out as much as I wanted, as always. We're both business owners, but I think I ended up right around right close to 20 sheds.
Yeah.
Which you talked earlier about you never find them where you think they're going to be, and that brings up a pretty good topic. I do a lot of bow hunting. I study whitetails, and it's amazing where if you do enough watching deer, you'd be amazed where these bucks will bed at. Mm-hmm. They will bed in the gnarliest, craziest areas you would ever think. And I think it's because they like to be secluded, they like to be hidden in brush, and that brings up that's where we find some of our sheds, is in these gnarly ravines, where there's brush and there's treetops and all that stuff. It's not necessarily out in the open fields, which, don't get me wrong, the deer have to go into open fields to go feed, right? Mm-hmm. But they also have to bed, and I can tell you, they bed more than they're in a field. Mm-hmm. So your chances of finding them in where these bedding areas are really, really high, especially a buck bedding area. But to answer your question, I think we found 20, and a lot of them were in thick timber bedding areas where I kind of knew that these bucks were bedding.
Sure.
So that's a good tip. If you guys can figure out where these big bucks are bedding, the way I look at it is go where you don't want to go. And that's usually where you find
it. It's just like driving deer, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You get into the pile of multiplier rows, and this way it's got a couple down trees, and
sure.
You can't even see through it, but the deer are hanging in there.
They're in there, and that's a good place to find sheds. We find sheds all the time. Another thing too is if you're in those multi-floor rows, you ever find any sheds that are hanging in the multi-floor rows? We call them hangers. They're always in there.
Head down looking at the ground, and then there's one eye level.
It's literally hanging in the multi-floor rows because, God, those multi-floor rows are everywhere. I hate them too. I mean, it literally almost rips your clothes off.
When I was in college playing baseball, I remember coming home for deer hunting, and I went back and was in the weight room the next Monday or Tuesday, and in the winter you don't have shorts on, but I was in the weight room, so I had shorts on, and I looked down, and it looked like this blackhead on my knee. I'm like, oh, that's disgusting, right? It almost started to get infected.
Sure.
So I kind of squeezed it, and out popped, I shit you not, a multiflora rose thorn that was that big.
Bobcat claw.
And the blackhead, I mean, this thing was huge.
Deer season, I peel those things out of my skin. I'm a walker, and we do that. You know, and for our viewers, in Iowa, you know, a lot of people do sit, and they'll sit over their food plots and their blinds and so forth, but our deer season is kind of a family thing, so we go as a large group. So we'll do deer pushes, you know, and we most of the time you're walking through those damn things, and some of those things literally look like a tiger claw, like you're talking inch long.
Yeah, they're no joke.
You get into those things sometimes, man, and you're stuck. Like you back out of them. You're like, all right, that's not the route we're gonna take, you know, and you're cutting down the hill.
I've had to unload my gun, like you say, back through this thing, because they're huge, and if you try and go around them, you're gonna be 5 yards from the guy above you or below you.
I know.
You're always like, well, this is gonna suck, but here we go. Unload the gun and just plow through the damn thing.
Exactly.
And you can't, we do that because for safety. And you couldn't shoot a deer in there if you wanted to.
No, there's some deer drives that we do, and people might not believe this, but it's so thick with multiflora rose and like cedar trees that a couple of the young guys that will walk through that they don't even take a gun because they know they can't shoot. They can't really even raise it up, and really you can't even see what's past it. So it's kind of unsafe to have a gun in that thick stuff. But you know, talking about shed hunting. You know, my cousin's a diehard shed hunter. I mean, I asked him too. I'm like, hey man, where do you find all these sheds? He's like, just everywhere. He's like, water sources too. Like, not only are those multiflora rows and like cedar tree patches where they like to bed, but you know, water sources. In the winter, your water sources get more limited because they freeze over. Okay, so you know, if a guy can find the water source, find a bedding area, and then find their feeding, they're going to make a triangle to that. They're going to eat, they're going to go water, and they're going to go to bed. So if you can kind of walk between those things and check them out, you know, that's where we find a ton of sheds.
Well, and I think, like, especially the feeding and the water sources are good too, because it's a place where their heads are up and down a lot, right? And as they get closer, if they've still got their antlers on, and they get closer to getting ready to shed them, I think it starts to irritate them, right? So they're up and down, and you get that momentum, and then they just give a shake. And in a lot of cases, that's in the fields and by the water sources. That's why those are coming off there. Yeah,
and look in the water. We found a lot of sheds in the water. And the other thing too that's always fun to find, well, it's fun and it's unfortunate to find, is the deadheads. You know, deer that maybe got shot and you couldn't find it, they had a bad blood trail, or maybe during the bow season, somebody shot it and put a bad shot. These deer, for our viewers, they'll go to water sources, you know, because they start to get kind of a fever, and they'll go right to water because they're injured, you know, and boy, you can find a lot of giant racks walking creeks. So, you know, so if you've got a creek along your farm or your property, or heck, the state land, we've got thousands of acres in Iowa of pristine state land that you can walk just the creeks. Creeks are great. They're beautiful to walk. Deer love them. You can find a lot of sheds that have fallen off along the creek or in the creek, or the deadheads. You know, we found a ton of giant deadheads. I actually had a friend that just sent me a picture, was walking a creek in Nebraska and found a 200-inch deadhead. Really? You know, and that's, you know, that's the mother lode. That's striking gold when you find that caliber buck.
Your gut still drops. It's like the worst case scenario.
It's like I said,
it's the best worst case scenario you can find.
Yeah, it's good that you found it because you get to admire it, because that's such a monarch of a deer, you know. But then again, you're like, I'd rather shot that on the hoof, you know.
Yeah, my grandpa was just showing me some pictures of a guy that found same size type 200-inch plus deer. Huge. And it's like, yeah, you know, if a guy lost a blood trail or whatever, I'm like, if I shot a deer and I had a blood trail, I'm like, I don't know that I could stop looking for that deer.
I've seen guys.
I would chase that thing around the county.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've seen guys that they've known they have shot their target buck, that 200-incher, and I've seen guys though that will spend, I mean, like weeks. It consumes their life for like the next couple of weeks, because if you're not an avid bow hunter, a 200-inch deer is the almighty.
Pinnacle,
It's the heaven of deer hunting, you know. And
but these deer are so hardy too. What these deer
so
can
tough.
run through, I mean, it's just wild. I remember, it's probably been 20 years ago now, but it was first shotgun season, and a family around the area had shot just probably 180. I mean, it wasn't quite a 200-inch deer, but it was a
big
monster,
buck.
right? Big buck.
Sure.
And of course, you had in the back of the truck, you drive downtown and show everybody. And this thing had an abscess on its cheek, like that big. and we didn't know what it was.
Sure.
But I talked to him later on, and they cut it out. It was a broadhead stuck in the deer's mouth.
Isn't that crazy? You know, you hear so many stories of that. So there was this deer actually like behind my house that I hunted for a long time, and his name was Flyer. This was one of those deer though that I was telling you about that, you know, we kind of had a history with. Like we tracked him, you know, year after year because he had that distinct flyer. And what was so cool about it was I hunted that deer that season when he was 5. I hunted him 23 days in a row, and it was like a game of chess. He'd come out in this corner, and I'm like, man, I gotta go hunt that stand, and then I'd go hunt that stand, and then he'd be coming out of this corner. I'm like, dude, he's right under my tree stand, and this went on for like 2 weeks. And what was so crazy about those deer, you know, you were just talking about that buck that had the broadhead in its jaw. This deer, when we ended up shooting him, he came by just like I wanted. Hallelujah, shot him. It was an awesome hunt. But what was so amazing and why I appreciate whitetails so much is this deer, when I skinned him out and caped him out, someone had shot this deer with a broadhead, with an arrow, and the arrow hit a rib and went between the shoulder blade and snapped off. So the muscle and things had grown around that, okay? So that's not all this deer had going on. So when I started kind of skinning a little further down, I realized that this deer had previously been shot by a shotgun, grazed in the hind quarter because part of his hind quarter was missing. On the other side of the deer, there was a .22 caliber rifle bullet in it. So somebody obviously had tried to poach this deer. So he had been shot by an arrow, been shot by a shotgun, and a .22. And what was so crazy and amazing about this buck is that this deer did when he was coming by, he was acting as if nothing was even wrong. He was on a doe that was in heat, his head down. He was still doing what he was supposed to be doing, and that was breeding to create other generations. But talk about a tough animal, man. Oh my gosh, he was beat up. He had hair missing on the side of where that arrow had gone in, and he was just going along like nothing was even wrong. And I'm like, man, and that's what drives me and it fascinates me about these animals, man. I mean,
so this deer probably came out of like the streets of Waterloo.
Straight up out of Chicago.
This guy was in the streets. He's probably in the system.
He's most likely got a rap sheet, probably gang affiliated. I can assure you that was the toughest deer I've ever seen.
It's just wild. Yeah,
it's just so crazy. But you know, and that's why when you go out and you find a shed off of a buck like that, you're kind of like, holy smokes, you know, what a monarch, tough giant.
Yeah,
you know, pretty awesome.
They're so tough. It's wild. Well, I appreciate you, Mitch. I think that we can go on for hours on this and deer, and both of us are avid deer hunters. I appreciate you taking some time again this morning to record another podcast. I think what we're going to do here is let's do a part 2 to this podcast.
I think so too. You know, we got a lot to talk about. Shed hunting, there's so many things that we can do, especially integrating with your kids, you know, and everything. And part 2 probably pretty good. Yeah,
so we'll do a part 2 to this. I thank you guys for joining in. We've got some exciting things going on this spring as far as content goes, especially when we get into the summer. So be sure to follow our Facebook page, follow the YouTube page at MudbuM Media Machine, and just keep watching, comment on it, guys. We appreciate the comments, starting conversations. The way we do stuff is not the only way, and by all means is not the best way. It's just our way, so we want to learn from you just as much as we're giving content as well.
Yeah, you know, like this podcast is so cool because it's kind of like a roundtable discussion, you know. When we bring up a topic, if you guys got something that you want to comment, great. We look forward to that. We encourage that. We want to learn the ways that you do it, and we want everybody on the platform to kind of learn and really have kind of a discussion, a community discussion to bring everybody together.
Yep. So again, like our pages, guys, we appreciate it, and we will see you with part 2 on the discussion around shed hunting and what to do in the spring. We'll see y'all next time.
Yep, thanks guys.